Today's stuff we're going to learn is Yevamot Daf Samach Vav. Today's stuff is sponsored by Perry Rosenfeld in loving memory of their father, Willie Rosenfeld, Yeshaya Zev HaKohen's 12th year site on the 11th of Iyar. A man filled with love and dedication to his family, community in Israel, he is sorely missed. And also dedicating today's daf to the memory of Joe Amanoff, who just passed away. Okay, we're going to, thank you for muting. Okay, I want to just remind everybody, I'm going to just mute everybody. Okay, I want to start with a bit of an intro to today's stuff, just a broad intro, which is we're going to get into kind of a crossover between laws of husband and wife and laws of dine mamno, what we call financial issues. We're going to talk about, it's really, part of our daf is really more out of a daf in Baba Metzia, which is all about monetary disputes. So it's a very interesting page, and we're going to get into all sorts of interesting things. Okay, the first thing we're going to start with is, a question on what we've been learning. We're going to finish up the chapter and start this 7th chapter of Yevamot. First, we have to finish this issue about Peru Revu, or women obligated in the mitzvah of Peru Revu. So we saw there were two opinions, and we seem to be siding with the opinion. It seems clear from everything we've seen that women are not commanded in Peru Revu. So now the Gemara asks, after we saw these three stories, right, that despite that women are not chayavot in Peru Revu, they clearly have what to say about it, right? Like the woman who said, this is too much for me and I don't want to ever have children again. And women who specifically couldn't have children and use it as a claim for divorce and said, I want to have children, right? So all of these sources on the one hand showed that women are not obligated in the mitzvah. On the other hand, they also all showed, first two stories showing, well, women could have a claim for divorce that's a legitimate claim, even though they don't have a mitzvah to have children. There's reasons why women would want children. If the husband can't provide that for them, they can claim divorce on those grounds and then get their tuba money, etc. The last sort of showed how women can take things into their own hands, right? Even when she disguised herself to try to get a psak, or to try to at least understand that she wasn't liable and she wasn't obligated, in which case she basically decided to make sure that she didn't get pregnant again, which kind of upset her husband. But, you know, on the other hand, she, it seems like, was able to do that because they already had children, right? And they had 4 children already, but he wanted to obviously continue and she didn't, and she took matters into her own hands. So now the Gemara starts off at the very top of Samach Vav. Velomi pakte, wait a minute, are you sure women aren't obligated? V'hama, right, like kind of like this last ditch effort, maybe really they're commanded in this mitzvah. V'hama Rav Achaba Rav Katina Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, he told us this story. Ma'aseh b'isha achat, there was a woman. Shechetzia shipcha v'chetzia bat chorim. Remember this situation of a half slave where one master freed, the other one didn't. She was owned by 2 masters, and now she's half-half. And when it came to an eved, what did we say? Well, the issue is that if this eved can't get married, right? Why not? Because maybe he's a slave, in which case he can only marry a shipcha knaanit, right? We're talking about a non-Jewish slave. The free side of him is actually Jewish. A Jewish man can't marry a slave, a Canaanite slave, or maidservant. So basically, this person can't get married. And there we said, la shevi itzara. He was commanded to procreate, so we can't leave him without being able to get married. So therefore, we force the master to free him. Okay, there was a whole machlokah Beit Shammai Beit Hillel about it. In the end, Beit Hillel agrees with Beit Shammai, and that's what the halacha is. We force the rabbi. So now, when it comes to a shifcha, you would think that if we do the same thing, it's because Lashevi Itzara, she's commanded to inhabit the world, right, to have children. So therefore, so what do we see happen? Kafu et rabba v'asabat chorim. They forced the adon to divorce, to have the master free her so that she could be fully Jewish, so that she could get married, because otherwise she's stuck, she can't get married. So we assume it must be because we care about her fulfilling the mitzvah. And that must mean she would be commanded, right? The free side of her that was Jewish would be commanded to do Peru Revu. Comes the Gemara and says, no. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and the Gemara Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, minhag hefker nahaguba. No, the problem was that people treated her like she was hefker, since she couldn't get married. Now Rashi switches it a little bit and claims that mafkeret atzma, she kind of put herself out there. She had no right. She couldn't get married, so she engaged in other relations. And because of that, Rashi says chotimba, she was causing other people to sin. She was a hazard to society, basically. That's one way of looking at it. I find it hard to look at it that way because, first of all, if the men really wanted it, there were other prostitutes around. It wasn't like, I'm sure she wasn't the only one. I look at her more at her, like this was a bushata, this like on a human level, right? Look what they were doing to her because she had no one to marry, right? Once someone's married, then people leave her alone, right? This from, you in Israel, this happens, you walk on the street and people whistle at you. Sometimes it still happens, right? But when you're covering your hair, everybody knows you're married, right? So they stop doing it. So it's the same kind of thing here, right? Once she was with a person and married, so people don't bother her. But when, otherwise they were taking advantage of her. And that's really, they had to resolve that situation. It wasn't appropriate. With that, and we're going to start a new chapter. Okay, now we're going to talk about a woman who gets into a marriage she's not allowed to be in. Okay, so an almana, a widowed or kohen gadol, a divorcee or a chalutza, one who did chalitza, to a kohen gadol, a kohen ragil, a regular kohen. Now, before we even move on to the next line, we have a lot of things to say. The first thing you have to know is, right, these women can't eat truma. They disqualify themselves from eating truma. Okay, they cannot eat truma because they are called halalot, right? They make themselves into a halalah. They therefore can't eat truma. The question is, what about their property? Okay, what if they bring in, imagine yourself back in, the day when people had big houses, wealthy people had servants, or, it could happen today also in certain societies, like a king, daughter of a king has this woman that, took care of her all her life. And she goes and gets married. So what does she do? She brings the woman with her, right? That's how it works, right? They go with her. So she shows up in the house, right? She marries a kohen. She's a divorcee. She shows up at his house with her and her maidservant, right? So the servant now, or it could be a male servant, female servant, it doesn't matter. She's not allowed to eat truma. The question is, what about the person she brings into the marriage? Okay. Can that servant eat truma or not? Now, there's different types of servants that she could bring with her, or slaves, if you want to call them, or whatever, right, in their day. And any kind of property she brings into the marriage basically splits up into two categories. We've discussed them before. We'll discuss them again. It's always a little bit confusing, but I'll try to make it as clear as possible so you won't be confused. There's nichse melog and nichse tzon barzel. Okay, nichse melog are things that kind of like what I just described, right? It was hers from birth. It was in her family. This was this family of servants that have been working in the family for years, right? That's, think of it, I always think of it as an heirloom, right? You bring an heirloom into the marriage. How do you take it out of the marriage, right? If something happens, the husband divorces you or dies, you bring it home exactly as is, right? It could be, it's a candelabra and it's tarnished and it's not as nice as it's scratched up, but what's the difference? It's yours. You brought it in like that. That's how you take it out. And that's the way nichse melog works. What happens is really, when you bring it into the marriage, it gets used by your husband. He can get proceeds from it. He can do anything he wants with it, really. Within certain boundaries, we'll see. But when the marriage is over, you take it home exactly as is. So if it went up in value, if it went down in value, let's talk about a servant. Let's say you brought in a very young servant and she wasn't worth so much because she was new and right? And then when the marriage ended, she was worth a lot more. She was older and more, she had many more talents than she did before, capabilities. So at that point, it doesn't matter that she's worth more or less than when you brought into the marriage. You get her exactly as she was, okay? Or the reverse. What if let's go to the extreme. What if she died while you were married to your husband and your husband dies? And now can you claim, I brought in a maid servant with me, I get the value back? No, because if you brought it as nichse melog, it's your loss. She's yours, basically. Yes, the husband, what happens is really, the husband gets all the maaseh yadeha, it's called. Whatever she works, he gets the proceeds while they're married. But in return, he has to feed her. You're not responsible to feed her. You don't have to put up the money for that. He feeds her. But again, if something happens to her, she breaks her arm and she's now worth less, tough luck on the woman, because that's nichse melog. It's things she brought in. She takes out exactly, whatever they're at that time. Nichse tzon barzel are different. Those are things she brings in, not as an heirloom, so to speak. She brings it in valued at a certain point. She says, listen, I'm bringing in slaves to this marriage. They're valued at 1,000 shekels each. And here's a list of who, the amount of servants I'm bringing in, 3,000 shekels worth altogether. When she leaves the marriage, if those slaves have died, if those slaves are worth more now, if it doesn't make a difference, she gets back 3,000 shekels. Okay. She gets it back at the value. Later today, we're going to see, does she get Like let's say she brought in 3 slaves at 3,000 shekels. Now 3 slaves are worth 6,000 shekels. Does she get to, or let's say they're worth, I don't know, let's come up with an amount that let's say each slave is now worth 3,000 shekels. And she say, I demand to get one of the slaves myself. Okay. And I want to take a slave home with me. Or can he say, no, all you get is 3,000 shekels. You don't have any rights to the body of the slave. Okay. Or it's easier to think about in objects, right? Like she brought in, again, it depends how you bring it. If it's your grandmother's candelabra and you brought it into your family heirloom, of course you take it back. Because it depends how you brought it in. But if you brought it in as nichse melog, you're going to take them back, right? Obviously, if it was an heirloom, that's how you'll bring it into the marriage. But if you list it under nichse tzon barzel, then there could be a debate, and we're going to see a big debate in the Gemara today. Does she get to claim, I want it back? Now, again, obviously, she only gets it back at the value that she deserves. So if it was a candelabra that's now worth a lot more money, she'd only get part of the candelabra. Obviously, if you can't split it, you can't split it. But where she could take the whole candelabra, but she'd have to pay him back the value. Okay. This is all, by the way, a bit of a gamble, right? Because nobody knows if the value of these things is just going to go up or not. Right? You might say, why would you bring in stuff nichse melog, or why would you bring them in tzon barzel? It's a bit of a gamble. You don't know if things are going to go up in value or things are going to go down in value, right? Like gold, for example, has gone up in value a lot, and over a while. So if you brought in gold, but who knew whether gold was going to go up in value or go down in value, right? So you can see that it's who takes the loss. It's very relevant, the whole thing. Okay, let's get back to our topic. So so if she brings in her maidservant that was in her family for many generations or whatever it is, right? The family, she brings it in as melog, as the heirloom type. And she brings in avadim that she's bringing in again, where she's going to take out the value of them in the end, but not necessarily, right? Whatever loss is incurred by him, right? She ends up she gets, the value is stable, right? If there was a loss, he incurs the loss. If there was a gain, he gets the gain, not her. So what happens to them? Now remember, let's go back to our topic because we got lost in the financials of it. She can't eat truma from this marriage because she's married to someone she's not allowed to be married to. So what happens? She brings in slaves. Do they get to eat truma or not? So it depends which kind. Let's make sense. Avdei melog, which are basically fully hers really, because she's going to incur the losses and the gains, lo yochlu b'truma, they're going to be like her. They can't eat truma. Avdei tzon barzel yochelu, but ones that belong to him, right? Because he incurs the loss and the gain. So they get to eat truma. I'll just tell you before we go on this Mishna, if I would have ordered this Mishna, I would have ordered it very differently, which is why I started off with defining for you what's nichse melog, what's tzon barzel. Only now the Gemara gets to that. And then the Gemara is going to get to a much more basic case before they get to the, right? They started with the exception to the rule. The exception to the rule is when a woman's married to a kohen and she doesn't eat truma, even though normally he would allow her to eat truma. Then they're going to get to the more basic cases. So I would have ordered this Mishna entirely differently, but we're stuck with the way the Mishna is ordered. So Elohen of melog. Now they're going to tell you what is an eved that's melog. Im metu metula, im otiru hotiru. If they died to her. It's her loss, right? She gets nothing when she leaves. If they went up in value, she gets the gain. Even though he has to feed them, right? Remember, because he gets the proceeds while they're married, he does obviously have some rights to them, and he's responsible for feeding them. Still, and here it's actually interesting. He's responsible to feed them, and yet he can't feed them truma. Remember, that was most of the food the kohen had. But again, this is all because it was a wrong marriage, right? Okay, she wasn't allowed to marry him. What are tzon barzel? Im metu lo, v'im otiru hotiru lo. Right? These are ones that if they went up, if they died to him, and he has to return the value anyway. If they went up in value, then he gets the gains because she only gets the value of what they were at the time of the wedding. Because he's responsible for them. Okay, later the Gemara is going to question this connection. Is it really clear that just because he has responsibility, you get to eat truma? Okay, but right now that's what the Mishna says. Later we're going to question it and we'll answer why it is in fact true. Okay, so now, I'm not going to actually answer why it's true, but they are going to prove that it is true. So now they get to a more basic case. So that's nichse melog, that's nichse tzon barzel. Now we say, therefore, a bat Yisrael, in a regular typical case, forget about our exceptional case that we started with, bat Yisrael sheniset lekohen v'chnisu la'avadim. So you have a regular girl from a regular house who can't eat truma where she's born, but she goes and marries a kohen, and she brings with her avadim. Melog, tzon, barzel, doesn't matter what kind they are, right? Only in the case where she's forbidden to eat truma do we start to distinguish. In a normal case, any slave she owns, go in with her to the marriage, she can eat truma, they can eat truma. And likewise, if she's a bat kohen who has servants before she's married, and then she brings them into a marriage with the Yisrael, what's going to happen? Just like she doesn't eat truma, they're not going to eat truma anymore either, right? So bat kohen shenisei l'Yisrael v'chnisu la'avadim ben avdei melog ben avdei tzon barzel har'elu lo yochlu b'truma. They can never eat truma because now she went to the Yisrael's house. Once she gets divorced or he dies, she goes back to her family's house, and the slaves can go back to eating truma just like she can. Okay, so basically, in general, they follow her. Here we have a unique case where she can't eat truma, but the kohen can eat truma, and that's why we have the split between the nichsei tzon barzel. The ones that he's responsible for can eat truma. The ones she's kind of responsible for, she has right? Remember, the value goes up or down. It's on her. They die. It's on her, right? Her loss. They have to be like her and don't eat truma. Soon we're going to get to 3 explanations as to why this is true. They're going to question this and say why it doesn't seem right. And they're going to come up with 3 reasons as to why this is. So that's exactly what the Gemara is going to ask right now. Avdei melog lo yochlu b'truma. Wait a minute. Servants of, right, slaves of a kohen who come in, they really belong to the kohen in the end. Okay, it's true they're hers and the responsibility is on her, but why don't they eat truma? There's a rule that anything that the kohen acquires, remember, a wife is considered acquired by the husband, even though that might bother us a little bit the way it sounds, but that's legally what happens. Okay, he's doing a kinyan on her when there's marriage. That's the kiddushin part. So any kinyan of his, right, a kinyan of a kinyan, meaning anything he acquired, and that person acquired something else, that gets to eat truma. We have a rule about that, meaning we should be able to bypass the woman. While it's true that the kohen eats truma, obviously, his wife, who's not allowed to be married to him, but is anyway, doesn't eat truma. But her slave should eat truma because it's irrelevant that she can't eat truma in the middle. Now, to us, it seemed pretty logical. She can't eat truma, or Evid can't eat truma. But comes the Gemara and says, no, we have a rule. A kinyan of his kinyan, okay, something acquired by someone he acquired gets to eat truma. It's also called, we get to eat truma, anything that's kinyan kaspo, right? So anything he owns. He basically owns something that someone he owns, okay? In essence, becomes his, right? Whether he's responsible or not, almost is irrelevant. So, because there's this drasha. How do we know this? Tanya. First, they're going to build on how do we know anything he owns? And then we're going to build on anything they own becomes his, right? In other words, again, not becomes his, has rights to eat truma. Okay, that's the distinction here. Doesn't matter if it's his or not. A kinyan of kinyano eats truma. We learn it from the pasuk about truma. Okay, so minayin lekohen shenasa isha, once he marries a woman, or kanavadim, notice, by the way, they don't say kanaisha, right? They say nasa isha, or acquired slaves. Sheyochlu b'truma, how do we know they get to eat truma? That's the basic. Shenema, the kohen ki yikneh nefesh, okay, a kohen who acquires a person. Kinyan kaspo hu yochalbo, right? And that's kinyan kaspo hu, it's owned by him, right? Hu yochalbo. It's his kinyan kesef, whatever's his kinyan kesef, can eat. Uminayim li'isha shekanta avadim, this is the second part. If she bought slaves, v'avadav shekanu avadim, even his avadim theoretically could buy slaves, sheyochlu b'truma. How do you know that slaves, or the slaves of the woman get to eat truma? Again, this should be regardless of whether she can or not. This has its own separate halacha. Shene'emar v'kohen ki yikneh nefesh, kinyan kaspo hu yochalbo. I'm not sure how to read where to make the break in that pasuk. Kinyano shekana kinyan ochel. Because it says ki yikneh and then kinyan kaspo, they say, if you learn from here, anything that he acquires and is acquired by the person he acquires, also gets to eat truma. So there's a special drasha that basically says this eved can eat. It doesn't matter. Nichsei melog, nichsei tzon barzel. So the Gemara says no. Okay, we're going to have 3 answers. I'll split it already. The first answer is that on a Torah level, they're actually not allowed to eat. The other 2 answers are going to say no. They take that drasha literally, and they say, you're right. On a Torah level, the Eved can eat, but we make a gzera, okay? Really, but only by Derabanan, they can't eat. Okay, so there's two approaches. There's three answers, two approaches. Either we say this isn't true in this case, that pasuk doesn't apply, in which case on a Torah level they can't eat. Or we say really on a Torah level, you're right, they can eat. But the rabbi said, wait, we have to worry about something else. So we'll see what that is in a minute. So now they said the following. It's true the kinyan of the kohen can eat truma, but only if, where's the strength of that eved eating truma? Because he was acquired by someone who could eat truma as well, by the wife. In the case where the wife can't eat, she can't pass on the ability to eat truma to her slave. Okay, and that's our case basically. Okay, and then obviously it's only going to be a melog and not tzon barzel, because tzon barzel are really considered his, and the melog are really considered hers. Right? Again, imagine it. She brings her own personal servant to the marriage, and that person is hers really, even though it's his and he feeds it and he gets the proceeds. But really, she brought it in. She's going to take it out. So that's really hers. She can't give her the rights to eat unless she can herself eat truma. So that's, again, I'll read it inside. Kol ha'ochel ma'achil. Anyone who can eat can. Kol she'en ochel eno ma'achil. Okay. I see in the chat you're using the usufruct, right? Usufruct is the translation of melog. Whether that helps you or not is a good question. Not everybody knows what usufruct is. So that's why I chose to use the term melog. But yes, it's usufruct. Usufruct, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, property. Okay. So now the Gemara says below, is this really true? Wait, is it always dependent? Can you only give rights to someone to eat truma if you yourself can eat truma? We're going to prove to you it's not true. The hare arel, the cholat me'im. Okay, this is the beginning of the next chapter. If you're a kohen who's uncircumcised, can't eat truma, or you're a kohen who becomes impure at a certain point, right? While you're impure, you can't eat truma. But she'edam ochlim, but ma'achilim. But they do allow others to eat truma. Okay, so they can't eat truma, but they can allow others to eat truma. So because of that, we're going to basically say, just 1 second. Okay, so now what we're going to say is that here you see people themselves can't eat, but their wives can't eat. Okay, so it explains there in the Mishna. The wife of an uncircumcised kohen gets to eat truma because she's married to a kohen, even though he can't eat. The wife of someone who becomes impure, right? You're in the middle of your marriage, the husband becomes impure, can't eat truma. Of course, his wife can eat truma. So they say, no, you can't use that as proof against our case because hatam pumayu kaivle, okay, which means right there, their mouth is hurting them, but right, your mouth is hurting you, it's going to go away, right? So what does that mean? It means basically they can be fixed. He can get circumcised. He can become pure by going to the mikvah. Those are things that can be rectified. That's why they have the power. This woman will never, ever, ever be able to eat truma by virtue of the fact that she married someone she wasn't allowed to marry, a kohen. She is forever forbidden from eating truma. So you can't compare the two. So you can say in our case, because she can't eat, she's not allowed to give on because of that. Well, let's take another case. Hare mamzel, she'ein ochel uma achil. Okay, let's look at we'll pull up a chart today. Okay, so here we have a case. Now, if you remember, Bat Israel, who's married to a kohen, can't, right? She can't eat truma before she's married. She gets married to the kohen, she can eat truma. What if he dies? Okay, if he dies, then she can continue to eat truma as long as she has a child from him. Okay, so again, normally if the kohen dies, she has no more connection to his family. But if she has a child, okay, so let's say in this case, she's married to a kohen and they have a daughter. Okay, if they have a daughter, right, she could, or a son. I actually forget whether it has to be a son. I think it's even a daughter. She has children. It's already connected to the family of the kohen. I have to check that point. I forgot it right now. But she can continue to eat truma this Bat Yisrael. But what if a Bat Kohen marries a mamzer? In other words, her daughter marries a mamzer, and that mamzer gives birth to another mamzer. Now, if the kohen dies and her daughter dies, and all she's left with from the kohen's family is a mamzer, okay? Now, the mamzer, first of all, the mamzer can't eat truma because his father's a mamzer and his father's not a kohen, right? You can only eat truma if your father's a kohen, right? This Bat Kohen herself even couldn't eat truma because she married someone who wasn't a kohen. But now, here, the Bat Yisrael has a grandson. You see, the mamzer too is her grandson. Now, we end up with a strange situation. The mamzer himself doesn't eat truma, but he allows his grandmother to eat truma. She eats truma because he exists. You follow? His mere existence connects her with her husband's family. So here you have a case of someone who can't eat truma and yet can cause others to eat. And he can never eat truma forever. So it's not like the case of the arel and the tameh. So comes the Gemara and says, or Ravina says, Ama Ravina, kinyan ochel ka'ama. Kinyan ochel ma'achil. Sheino ochel eno ma'achil. We're talking about the kinyan, something acquired by someone who can eat versus someone acquired by someone who can't eat. We're not talking about the comparison of the mamzer was a totally different situation. There, it's not that the mamzer acquired the grandmother and therefore the grandmother can eat. No, it was just his mere existence gave the woman the ability to eat truma. Normally, she could have grandchildren who can't eat. First of all, this could be a case without a mamzer. It could be any child of hers that was born to a Yisrael father, right? Couldn't eat truma, but yet enables her to eat. This is a totally different case. It has nothing to do with our case. We're trying to give a case where because you acquired something, right? We want to know, can you enable them to eat truma by marrying a kohen? That's not at all comparable because this is only the virtue of his existence enables her, but it shouldn't matter whether he can eat truma or not. So that's not a good comparison. So in the end, we seem to say, yes, we can hold by this answer. If you can eat truma, you can pass it on to someone you acquired. If you can't eat truma, then you can't pass it on. That was answer number one. Rav Amar, like I said, now we're going to have two answers that basically say, you're right about the drasha. Really, someone she acquires should be able to eat truma because they're an acquired property of something, the kohen, right, of the kohens, which means that they can eat even if, right, we bypass her, even if she can't eat, they can eat. But the rabbis made exela. So we're going to have two different options as to why. Rav Amar midoraita mechla achle. From a Torah level, they can eat truma. The Rabbanit degazrabu, the rabbi said, no way. Kadesha tomal, what do we really want in this case? We want them to get divorced. Okay. So therefore, what do we want to happen? If we don't allow the slave to eat, then what will happen? Kadesha tomal, ani ena ochelet, avadai ena mochlim. We want her to say, listen, I don't eat truma. My slaves don't eat truma. Zonahi etzlo. I'm like a nobody in this house, right? Could you imagine living in a house? Everyone's eating this food and you can't eat the food they're eating. It's like saying, right, you're a nobody. And therefore, hilkach atela fuka, right? It'll cause him to want to divorce her. In other words, once there's this bad vibe in the house where she's feeling very on the outs, eventually it'll cause him to say, you know what, I'm going to divorce this woman. And that's really what we're looking to happen. So that's one possible trap. Rav Ashi Amal, we're worried let's just take a regular case. In a second, we're going to say this doesn't make any sense. So if you start to say this doesn't make so much sense to you, don't worry. The Gemara says so also, and they're going to say that's not really what Rav Ashi meant. He meant something else. But let's assume we have a regular man, kohen, married to a Bat Yisrael. She's a grusha, she's a divorcee. She can't eat truma. Her eved can. That's what we just said, right? Even her nichse melog can eat truma on a Torah level. If we allow that, what are we worried? We're worried that when he dies, what happens? When he dies, normally in a normal case, the daughter, right, the wife stops eating. She normally goes from eating truma to not eating truma, right? Because now she's not married to a kohen anymore, assuming she has no children. But in this case, since her status didn't change, she couldn't eat truma when he was alive. Now she can't eat truma when he's dead, but nothing changed in her status. Her slave might think that he can continue eating truma. That's why we don't allow it. To which the Gemara says, that's a little ridiculous, right? Because he should be worried in any case that a Bat Yisrael is married to a kohen, that her servant, if you're worried, her servant's not going to realize that he can't eat truma anymore because she's not married to the husband. Well, that would happen in a regular case also, even when she, right? I tried to explain in a way that maybe makes a little sense, but really it makes no sense at all. Because obviously when they get divorced or he dies, clearly she's no longer connected to the kohen. Clearly the Eved's no longer connected to the kohen. No one's worried that the Eved's going to eat truma. So what does Rav Ashi say? Rav Ashi ba'almana kohenet. Okay, it could be almana, it could be grusha, it doesn't matter. But that the woman who we're talking about, the woman that the issue was a bat kohen. Now let's think about it. Now it gets a little more complicated. A bat kohen was able to eat truma before, right? She gets married to the kohen. Now, she and her slave, right, both ate truma in the house of her father. She gets married, what happens? She eats truma. I'm sorry, she can't eat truma because she's a divorcee. Her slave can eat truma though, the nichse melog, right? Now, when the kohen dies or divorces her, now she goes back to her father's house. She can no longer eat truma because she is disqualified forever from eating truma. But she wasn't eating truma anyway, right? In the house of the kohen. He was eating truma. So when he goes back to the father's house, he just assumes, well, now I'm back in the original house I was in, I can eat truma. He really can't though, because his koch to eat truma comes from his master, right? Which is his, right? The woman in charge of him, who can't eat truma in her father's house. So the slave can't eat truma either in the father's house. Only in the husband's house he could, because a husband acquired the wife, and this was the wife's kinyan. So because of the husband, he was allowed to eat truma, but back in the first house, he can't. But he won't know that. He'll think, I ate truma there in the beginning. I ate truma all throughout, even though the wife wasn't, but I was able to eat truma. So when I go back, I can eat truma as well, even though she can't. It will cause confusion. That's why. Okay, so let's read it inside. Almana kohenet, right? It's coming only which is coming from a bat kohen, right? When she's a bat kohen, is it going to be an issue? He will think. Oruye means lahorot heter. He'll think that it's permitted. Now, miikara achle b'truma. Right? Originally, they ate truma in the house of her father-in-law. As soon as she married, okay, I see you're asking a question. I'm going to answer right now. As soon as she married this kohen, what happens? This is what we started with. A woman who's not allowed to marry a kohen marries a kohen, a divorcee, for example. She forever she's basically disgraced herself, right? She's done something wrong in relating to the kahuna. She can never for the rest of her life eat truma. So even when she goes back to her father's house, she's disqualified. So, even though she couldn't eat truma, he still continued to eat truma, right? Achle b'truma de gavrai. He ate truma on account of the kohen. So hashta hadre le'eli lemilta kamaita. When he goes back to the father's house, he'll say, "Oh, I'm just going back to where I was before." But he won't understand that there's a big difference between him and the father's house now and him in the father's house then. In the beginning, she wasn't a halala, and she was allowed to eat truma in her father's house. But now she caused herself to be a halala. She is forever called a halala, right? She can never go back to eating truma. So when she's in her father's house, she can't eat truma. He can't either, because his only power to eat truma comes through her. And she can't eat truma. He can't either. When she's married, he can on a Torah level because of the husband. But that's why we're not going to allow it, because you can see to you it's confusing, right? For sure, it might be confusing to this Ed, and you won't realize. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, though. We just said any almana or grusha can't, right? Almana de kohen gadol, grusha, or chalutza de kohen idiot. Their slaves can't eat truma, the nichse melog. Now, this should only apply if you're a bat kohen. The whole reason for the gzeira was only if you're the daughter of a kohen. There's no such gzeira if you're a daughter of a Yisrael. We're not worried about. That's what we said before, right? You're not going to think, the Eved isn't going to think, now I can continue to eat truma. Obviously, he's no longer connected to the kohen's house. So Amana, Tinach Amana Kohen, this works for her, but Amana Bat Yisrael Ma'ikalamera, how can you explain that? So Gemara says, Lo Plug Rabbanan, or Lo Plige Rabbanan. The rabbis don't distinguish. In other words, once we worried about this for a Bat Kohen, we're just going to put the gzeira across the board. This happens very often. It's just we're going to put it across the board. No nichse melog of a woman can eat truma because of this gzeira. So we had, again, one who says it was not right to level they can't eat because she can't eat, so they can't eat. The other two said, no, we bypass that. Still, the kinyan of a kinyan can eat, even if the one in the middle can't. But the rabbis made a gzeira for one of two reasons, either to encourage them to get divorced or because of this issue that if she's a bat kohen, he might think that he can continue eating truma when they go back to the father's house. Itmar. Now we get into this interesting financial issue. Hamachneset shom lebala, and you can imagine this issue being very relevant. She brings in nichse tzon barzel. Okay, we're now moving from nichse melog to nichse tzon barzel. Again, what does that mean? She brings it in and they evaluate it. Okay, at the time of the wedding, they make an evaluation. This is worth X. Okay, this whatever it is, she brings in. Okay, she brings some couch. She says, okay, this couch, or I'm trying to think of something that's not such an heirloom kind of thing. She brings this couch in. She says, this couch is valued at 5,000 shekels. Okay. Now, so they write it down, couch valued at 5,000 shekels. He omeret, kelai ani notelet. V'hu omer, damim ani noten. She says, right, marriage is over. She says, I want my couches back. He says, I'm going to give you the value of them, right? I told you this before. Again, if the couch is now obviously worth less money because people used it all those years, it's now worth less money. So he would have to give her, if it was valued at 5,000 shekels and now it's 3,000, he would have to give her the couch and another 2,000 shekels, right? If it was for some reason went up in value, okay, let's say it was gold, she brought in and then she wants, right now it's worth way more than it was then. So she would take part of the gold and not all of it. Again, she's not claiming a difference in value. She's going to take exactly whatever it was valued at, but she wants the object itself, whether it's part of the object, more than the object because he owes her more money, whatever it is. Don't worry about the money. Question is, does she have any rights to the object itself? It's a fascinating discussion, right? You can imagine a couple breaking up, right? And she could. I had a friend, a roommate once who was a Torah at Rabbanit, and when she got married, I remember she wrote my computer and she put the value of it, and she wrote like the value of all the things she was bringing into the marriage. It's very interesting. So anyway, hadinim mi, who gets it? Okay, does she get the rights to get the object back, or can he say no? All I owe you is the value. So classic machloket. Rav Yehuda Amal, turning out I'm a bet, Hadin Ima, she gets to get it back. It's her, it was hers to begin with, she gets it back. Again, with the nichse melog, there's no question. Those are the heirlooms. That's why I always think heirlooms. They clearly go back to her. Because remember, right? It's not a value thing. She gets it back. But these, the nichse melog, tzon barzel, there's a question. For Rabbi Ami Amar Hadin Imo, no, he has rights to say no way, no how, I'm giving you the value. So the whole rest of the stuff is a discussion about these two opinions. Rav Yehuda Amar Hadinima Mishum Shevach Beit Avia Didah. Because of the Shevach Beit Avia. In other words, these were things that belong to her family. Okay, even though they're not, let's say, heirlooms, right? They belong, or first of all, they could be heirlooms, and just she brought it into the marriage value instead of it, right, at object, in the way of nichse tzon barzel. But these were things that they prided themselves on, and therefore they get it back, right? It's weird to leave your stuff in someone else's house. Rabbi Ami Amal Hadinimo. Rabbi Ami says, no, it's his. Kevan de Amal Mal. Now he says, on what basis? On our Mishna. What did our Mishna say about nichse tzon barzel? Im metu lo, v'motiru lo, ho'il v'chaya b'achlu yitan yochelu. Because he's responsible for them, they get to eat truma, meaning they're basically his, 100%, right? It's just that he owes her the value of them. But they're entirely his. That's what our Mishnah seems to indicate. Metu lo, they die. He's got to replace it. It's all on him. So Amar Rav Safra says, wait a minute. You're missing some basic point. The Mishnah never said the words that you were looking for the Mishnah to say. Amar Rav Safra, mikatane vehin shelo. It doesn't say, and they're his. It never says those words. It just says, ho'il v'chaya b'achlo yutan katani. It says he's responsible for them. There's a difference between saying you're responsible for something and replacing them if something happens, and saying they're yours. But if I loan you something and I say you're fully responsible, are they yours? No, you can't claim rights. So of course you have to return it to me. So that's the way. What are you saying? A woman's stuff that she brings into marriage, she takes responsibility for them, but they become his entirely? No way, they're hers. No way are they his. Okay, he has full responsibility, but it doesn't mean they're his. So now they question Rav Safra and they say, wait, you want to say they're not his, which means that the only reason they're eating truma is because he's responsible for them, but not because they're owned by him. In other words, there's two ways to read the Mishnah. Either they can eat truma because they're fully owned by him because he assumes responsibility. They're fully owned by him, and that's why they can eat truma. Or you say, no, they're not fully owned by him, but he has responsibility. And with responsibility comes eating truma as well, which basically means what they say to Rav Safra is, it sounds like you're saying anyone who assumes responsibility for an item would then allow it to eat truma if they're a kohen, right? That's what it sounds like you're saying. And I can disprove this from a Mishnah. The Hatnan, or at least try to, in a second we'll see, it's actually going to prove exactly what Rav Safra says. But right now, he tries to quote the beginning part of the Mishnah, which seems to disprove Rav Safra. The Hatnan, Yisrael shesachar parami kohen. Okay, a Yisrael, right? Not a kohen, a non-kohen, rents a cow from a kohen. Question is, can the cow eat truma or not? If the cow belongs to the kohen, the cow can eat truma. Who does this cow belong to? It belongs to Yisrael, but it was rented by, this is why we're mamash and Bava Metzia now. Bava Metzia is all about laws of shmirah, of watching someone's item. What's your responsibility? Who's responsible? Who's not? So if you rent something, you're responsible for damages, right? If someone steals it from you while you're renting it, you're responsible. So Yisrael shesachar parami kohen, hareze yochilenu karshine truma. He can eat truma. Kohen shesachar parami Yisrael, af al pi shemazonotav alav, lo yochlenu karshine truma. So what does the truma go by? The owner and not the person who rented. In both cases, right, we follow the owner, not the person who rented. So what do you see? Even though the renter is responsible for damages, he doesn't enable a truma. So they basically say to Rav Safra, you were claiming they're not his. It's just that he has responsibility. Because he has responsibility, they can eat truma. That's not true, right? Here we show a case where someone had responsibility for something and they don't allow it to eat truma. So they say to Rav Safra, wait a minute, you missed the end of that Mishna. You think you're right? It's true. You're responsible if it gets lost, or you're responsible if it gets stolen. But the renter is not fully responsible. He's only responsible for certain things. If some terrible thing happened to it that was totally unexpected, or if it decreased in value, right? You rent a car and after a number of days, it depreciates, but you don't pay the depreciation costs, right? I mean, maybe I shouldn't use that as an example because probably part of the cost includes that. But basically, when you rent something, you have a rental charge. You don't have a charge for depreciation, okay? Or if something something that happened naturally, you wouldn't be responsible. So you're not fully responsible. It's halodani ela l'seif. It's actually more similar to the end of that Mishnah, which says, Yisrael shesham para mikoin. If you borrow a para, or you rent a para, you rent an animal, and you say, the animal right now is valued at 1,000 shekels. I'm going to give you back at the end of this rental agreement, right? At the end of my rental time period, I will give it back to you at the value of $100. If it's whatever I just said, 1,000 shekels. If it went down in value, I will replace, right? I'll give you the difference. I'll pay you the difference. In that case, lo yachilenu karshinei truma. If he gets it from a kohen and he's a Yisrael and he assumes responsibility fully, then it goes by the guy who rented, which is exactly our case of the kohen. Aval kohen shesham parami Yisrael, in the reverse case, where it was a kohen who took on full responsibility if something was belonging to a Yisrael, yochilenu karshinei truma. So Dafka, it seems like Rav Safra was actually right in what he said, that basically his question stands against what they were trying to say before. Okay, so again, Rabbi Ami tried to prove it from the Mishnah. Rav Safra says the Mishnah never said hein shelo; it just said you're responsible, and that therefore it wouldn't prove your point. Yativ Rabba v'Rav Yosef b'shilei Pirkei de Rav Nachman. So now Rabbi and Rav Yosef are sitting there at the end of the Shiur of Rav Nachman. V'yatvei v'ka'amrei, and they say, Tanya kavatei de Rav Yehuda v'Tanya kavatei de Rabbi Ami. I'm going to bring proof for Rav Yehuda from a bright, and I'm going to bring proof from Rabbi Ami from a bright. Or we're going to bring. Tanya kavatei de Rabbi Ami. Avdei tzon barzel yotzim b'shem v'ayin le'ish avalo le'isha. Okay, we have to learn all sorts of things today. If you have a Canaanite slave and you knock out their tooth, he goes free. But only if the owner knocks out the tooth. So now, what if, right, the husband knocked out the tooth or the wife knocked out the tooth? Who's the owner? So it obviously goes by the owner. So if it's tzon barzel, yotzim b'shem v'ayin le'ish avalo le'isha. If the woman knocked out the teeth, he wouldn't go free because she's not his owner. So what do you see here? The husband owns the tzon barzel. It goes out if he goes free if he knocks out the tooth, which means that the husband could say, it's mine and you don't get it back. I'll just give you the value. Tanya kavatei de Rav Yehuda, but here's a bright on the other side. Hamachneset shom leba'ala. Im ratza ba'al limkor lo yimkor. If she brings in something she evaluated, meaning nechtzei tzon barzel, if he wants to sell it, he can't sell it. Because again, why wouldn't he be allowed to sell it? Because in the end, she has a lien on that. She can get it back. Velod ella, which proves Rav Yehuda. Velod ella. Afilu echnis la shomi shelo. What if he added into the ketubah not something that was hers from before? He says, in the event of divorce or death, I'll give you this couch. Okay. Im ratza ba'al limkor lo yimkor. Even that he can't sell. Okay, which was even his to begin with becomes hers. Meaning, tzon barzel she gets herself. She can claim rights to that item. Machrush nehem leparnasa. Let's say they both decided during the marriage they want to sell it because they have no food. So it was the case. Even in that case, she agreed to it. She has a lien to it because it was hers, right? It was written in the ketubah that it's hers. Meaning, let's say tzon barzel are totally hers. She can go claim it back. She'd obviously have to replace the money value of it. But she could say, I know we sold you the couch when I was desperate for money, but I want it back now. And they'll have to give it to her. She'll have to give them the money for it, but she can get it back. So here you see they're fully hers. So bright to there. Amar Nachman halachat ke Rav Yehuda. Rav quotes Rav Nachman is saying the halach is like Rav Yehuda. Amar le Rav Nachman v'hatani kavatei de Rabbi Ami. But isn't there this really good bright that supports Rabbi Ami's position? So they say afagav de Tanya kavatei de Rabbi Ami. Rav Nachman says even though there's a brighta, mistabra tame de Rav Yehuda mishum shevach beit aviyah. His logic seems more accurate. and which sits better with us, right? I brought it into the marriage. I should be able to take it out of the marriage, okay? Because of the, here they don't focus on her. They focus more on her family's pride and all that. But still, right? And nowadays we view it more as her. We'll end with this story. She gave him, she put into her ktuba this cloak, okay, which means she gets it back, right? At the end, the value of it anyway, tzon barzel. Shchiv, he died. They took it and they put it as tahrichim for the dead, shrouds. Now, once you use something as burial shrouds, it's forbidden to benefit from it. So now we're stuck. Was it hers or was it his? So what happened in the story? Amarava, kanya mitana. Rava says they acquired it, it's theirs, and she can never use it again because it's asr bahana. Now, we're going to ask, wait a minute, Rava, weren't you the one who just said, Amar nani bereid Rav Yosef, bereid Rava, Rav Kahana. V'hama Rava, Amar Rav Nachman, halachat ke Rav Yehuda. Don't we say we pass like Rav Yehuda that she has rights to it? So now he says something interesting. Amar lei, we'll continue with this tomorrow. Milo mode Rav Yehuda, mechusar guvaina, became a mechusar guvaina berishu tekai. Rav Yehuda said that if she goes to court and claims this is mine, she can claim it back. But it's mechusar guvaina. That means she has to make a claim. In this case, now maybe she didn't have a chance to make a claim, but she hadn't yet made a claim. What happened? In other words, as long as she doesn't make a claim, it's his because it was in his possession and it's his. Yes, of course, they have to return the value up, but it's his. In this case, before she had a chance, and maybe you'll claim, well, that's not fair. But theoretically, what happens to this? Before she has a chance, I'll explain tomorrow's class why even more so this works. Before she has a chance to make a claim, they used it. Once they used it, burial shrouds are forbidden to benefit from. They basically uprooted the lien on the item and she can no longer claim it anymore. If she had claimed it before they used it as burial shroud, she would have gotten it no problem. But because they used it already and because it was in his reshut, they had the rights to do that. They only don't have the rights if she claims it, but she hadn't claimed it, so they used it and now it's too late. Okay, and we'll talk about this why it fits in with other things Rava said about things that mafkia midei shiabud. They uproot something from a shibud, from a lien that could be on it, certain things that work to do that, and this is going to be one of them. Okay, it's actually not listed in the three, but the idea is that this is the same kind of idea as he said in other cases. Okay, we'll end with this for today. Have a great day, everyone.